This is a Canon C100. This camera is built for video production. As you can see, there's many buttons and functions. Let's go through and set it up. Put the battery in, turn on the camera. The first thing you want to do upon getting this camera for the first time is to clear the settings, just in case it's been used before. Before shooting a scene, make sure your camera has the correct black levels. You can do this by going into Settings, ABB, and putting a lens cap on the camera or taking it off and attaching a body cap. If the camera doesn't have the correct black balance, there'll be problems in post-production with noise in the picture. Doing this saves time and effort. When inserting the SD cards, it's best to do a full format of the SD card so you can A. Maximise the space on the card, and B. Prevent the data from corrupting or clashing with other stuff. Now we are ready to set up our shot. There's 5 key settings you will want to remember to check when setting up your shot. An easy way to remember these settings is Fiasco. FPS, ISO, Aperture, Shutter Speed, Colour or White Balance, Operate. Make sure your footage is at the correct frame rate too. The C100 has 2 options, 50i and PF25. 50i stands for interlaced footage at 1/50th of a second. PF25 is progressive, so the whole screen will refresh at once progressively at 1/25th of a second. The standard frame rate is 25 FPS in the UK and 24 FPS in the US. ISO is a measure of how light sensitive the camera is. Raising the ISO brightens the image, which is good for dark locations. However, raising the ISO can produce grainy footage. A lower ISO would have a darker image, but would have an improved dynamic range too. Aperture is measured in f-stops. A low aperture, such as f1.8, allows more light into the lens and reduces the depth of field. A high aperture, such as f22, will have less light allowed into the lens and a high depth of field. You can see this in the iris of the lens as it closes and opens. Since we are shooting at 25 frames per second, we're going to use a shutter speed double that, 1/50th shutter speed. This is because it gives natural motion blur to each frame, like how humans would see an image. Using 1/25th shutter speed will give a lot of motion blur, and using 1/250th shutter speed will almost have no motion blur. This applies to any frame rate, so if you shot a video at 60 FPS, you would likely want to use 1/120th shutter speed. White balance affects the warmth or coolness of a shot depending on the colour of the light that is hitting the camera. There are 2 main types of light, tungsten and daylight. They are measured in Kelvin values. Tungsten sits around 3300 Kelvin, and daylight around 5500. Sometimes you might use the wrong white balance for creative effect. Now you've set the 5 key settings up, what about the rest? Within the camera there are cool functions to help you get the right shot, such as peaking, zebras and the Waveform Monitor. Let's talk about those. Peaking helps the camera operator to get the right focus on the subject. When you press peaking, you will notice that the sharpest parts of the image are highlighted. Changing the colour is important. If you choose to shoot a scene that is predominantly red in colour, using red peaking may be difficult to read. Therefore, using yellow or blue would be a lot clearer and more effective. That said, you can also make the LCD screen black and white to help you find the focus, as it offers better contrast with the peaking. Don't worry, the footage will still be in colour. The zebra option helps you work out the exposure of your image. It particularly helps when checking for overexposure or whiteout. Whiteout being that the information is lost and will be just pure white. This is problematic during post-production. When you turn it on, you will see vertical lines in white or brighter parts of the image. You can set the sensitivity of the zebras, so if you set it to plus/minus 80%, that would mean that the zebras would appear in parts of the image that are 75 to 85% white. You can lower this or increase this. However, if you increase it too much, you are running the risk of having overexposed footage. The Waveform Monitor, once pressed, will show a box on the LCD screen. This is the Luminance Waveform. The reading of this indicates how bright and how dark parts of the image are. This can be read on the IRE scale. The x-axis of the waveform is shown as left to right of our frame, and the y-axis is shown as the scale increments between 0 and 100, 100 being pure white and 0 being pure black. Similar to the zebras, it can help with exposure. The ND filter is used to dilute the amount of light exposure coming through the lens without affecting the aperture. Think of them as a pair of sunglasses for the lens. There are different strengths of ND filters. For example, ND1 on the C100 will be the equivalent of using an aperture of 2 f-stops, but without affecting the depth of field. ND2 accounts for 4 f-stops and ND3 accounts for 6.